Thank you very much for the invitation to talk about our experiences of working with ROR IDs. So this presentation is about how ChronosHub streamlines open access workflows and where ROR is really the key to opening the door for a lot of the different challenges that we have around open access management. My name is Martin Jagerhorn, and I'm head of business development at ChronosHub. So seen to the context, we all like open access and think that's great, of course, but as you all know, it also leads to a number of challenges. And from our point of view, to summarize that briefly, we have funders issuing different publishing policies, which drives researchers to publish in certain journals and in certain ways with certain licenses and things like that, which means that it becomes increasingly complicated for researchers to navigate through that system and ensure they stay compliant with these policies. The policies also drive publishers to develop new business models. There are currently about 28 different business models or open access mechanisms, including read and publish agreements, publish and read, subscribe to open, APCs, vouchers, waivers, discounts, and so forth. So this makes it immensely difficult for institutions to manage these different processes. Very often they have to manually go into the publisher's systems to try to figure out which articles that are included in a certain or covered by a certain agreement, where they have to pick up an invoice and so forth. But from our perspective, the worst situation is really for the researchers, because they have to do a lot of manual work, fill in very long forms when they submit their manuscripts to the publishers, then other forms to report back on the outputs of their grants to the funders, and then again, manually entering data on their articles in different local systems at their institution, like institutional repositories or CRIS systems. So there are really important challenges because stakeholders, they do have systems, but these systems do not communicate very well with each other. So there are a lot of silos still. And this leads to data being fragmented or not consistent and really no reliable analytics. And it's truly time consuming and very costly for everyone involved. And in addition, there are risks of being non-compliant, both for authors and for institutions, with quite severe implications increasingly, where institutions, for example, sometimes have to pay penalties to funders where they have been found not to be compliant with their funding policies or publishing policies. So if we look at this example, this is how we see it at ChronosHub, but the same principles apply to any system in the research ecosystem, really. So we see that ROR IDs are really super important as enablers for automation. Without unique identifiers or global unique identifiers, persistent identifiers, it is impossible to automate. So we see this as putting the authors at the center, looking at the author journey. They need to select journals for their submissions, and already at this stage, they assess the journals, understand who will pay for this and how much. So we need to understand if the corresponding author's affiliation is an organization having an agreement with this specific publisher, covering this specific journal, giving them, for example, a discount, or that any costs are covered by a read and publish agreement, right? So ROR IDs are important already there for understanding which agreements that should apply. Then we facilitate submissions into peer review systems. And this is where it's, of course, extremely important that we know what the primarily the corresponding author's affiliation is, but also co-author affiliations, and that we can map those two organizations in the peer review systems. This is where peer review systems very often use Ringgold IDs. So here we've implemented an integration with the Ringgold API. So we can go from a ROR ID to an ISNI ID, from the ISNI ID, sending that to the Ringgold API and get Ringgold ID back. And that's what's matched up in here. And when we get data back upon acceptance, well, we still use the Ringgold API, but go the other way from a Ringgold ID to an ISNI ID, and then further to a ROR ID. Then for license management that we Streamline for publishers, well, then we can directly apply the right licenses based on the corresponding author's affiliation and if there are any specific agreements and conditions for them. This does not only apply to the corresponding author's affiliation, but also to the funder. So we typically include information on the grants and the funder organization. Funder organization. So we do use the FundRef registry IDs, but we also have ROR IDs on all the funders that we have mapped across. Then open access processing and approvals, same thing, really important to understand which organizations and funders these articles are associated with so that we can automate these different checks. So an administrator at a library, for example, directly can see green marked or green highlighted all the criteria that they have, for example, that the corresponding author is truly belonging to their own organization. And the same goes for APC building and collection, of course, so we know who they are. Then when we work for publishers, again, we integrate with their production systems to put it into, to publish the actual article. And then for reporting, extremely important, again, to have the right identifiers. And then here at the end, we also automate increasingly for institutions, repository deposits. So when we then make data available for institutional repositories and CRIS systems to ingest from ChronosHub, for example, over the API, or that we actively write into these systems. Again, we need to have essentially one-to-one mapping of the different organizations. So essentially, the ROR IDs play a role really in every single step along the journey, and especially when we talk about integrations, and that's of course closely related into automation. To automate this author journey, well, we need to integrate seamlessly with a lot of different systems, and that includes not only peer review systems here and production systems here and institutional repositories and CRIS systems, but during this journey, we also integrate with, for example, finance systems, CRM systems at publishers, and of course also login servers for authentication, to a certain extent less relevant than with the ROR IDs for that part. So hopefully that provides an overview of how we use ROR IDs at ChronosHub and on the platform throughout to enable as seamless workflows as possible. So really important initiative, and we're really looking forward to an increasing uptake of ROR IDs across the research ecosystem. So with that said, thank you very much, and looking forward to any questions later on.